Welcome to the DevReady Podcast, where we're helping non-techs build better tech. Today, we're fortunate enough to be joined by Jordan Green. Jordan, if anyone doesn't know, he is the founder and president at Melbourne Angels. And I'll let Jordan bring in a bit of detail around that. Jordan, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate you taking time.
Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
So we met at a Melbourne Angels event, had a bit of a conversation around some AI and technology and where things might be moving. And I thought, yes, it'd be great to share your story once I heard a bit more about it. Now, take me back. You've been investing and an angel effectively for, I recall, 20, 30 years. Is that about right?
I made my first angel investment when I was doing my own startup in Silicon Valley in the 1990s. So about 26 years ago.
Yeah. Startups. What is it about startups that fascinates you? Because I find there's a certain breed of people that hang around this sort of area. What is it about startups that sort of engages you?
A number of different things, I guess. Everything I've done has always been on the frontier, whether it's a technology frontier or an economic frontier, but and I've also, ever since I was a kid, I've been starting things, starting organizations, at school, at university, starting clubs, starting social groups. And I the only sort of, when I graduated, I did electronic engineering, and when I graduated, I got a job with IBM. But I was only there for about 8 months before I headed off for a postgraduate research fellowship overseas. And ever since then, I've always been starting new businesses. It just sort of happened, and it's got a lot to do with having had early on a very strong focus and activity around bleeding edge technology. So I was starting what today people call tech startups, long before it was fashionable, and also when it was real technology. I mean, a lot of tech startups today are using technology. They're building things with software, but they're not actually creating technology. Back when I was doing it, whether you were hardware or software, and usually in those days you had to be a bit of both, you were actually creating new technology. So, of course, the internet didn't exist when I first started.
Yes, 24. Yes, that would have been right.
I first started building companies was in the 80s.
No internet back then, no.
No. So, so I've always enjoyed the push to do something, to change the world for the better, to leverage the technology capabilities to do things that make life easier and better for people. It's just exciting. Living with the world of constant change.
It's continuously evolving and a lot more rapidly as we go into 2023. It's always moving, isn't it?
Yep.
If you take us back to your first startup, what was that? What was that all about? And it would have been some sort of cutting edge tech, as you describe it. So what was that when you started?
Well, yes and no. So the first company that I co-founded, and you pretty much always co-found. I mean, there's very little that anyone can do entirely on their own. Was actually an engineering services company here in Melbourne. But what we did was apply the very latest technologies. So I had one of the very first licenses for AutoCAD in Australia, the very first version of what they called AutoCAD International. And for those who don't know, AutoCAD is a computer-aided drafting tool made by a company called Autodesk. It has dominated the sort of the low end and mid-market for a very, very long time, 30, 40 years. So I was introducing computer-aided design into sort of heavy engineering and industrial engineering activities in Australia. We then introduced a number of other technologies. We brought in thermal imaging. Now, for those who are old enough, there used to be an airline called Ansett Airlines. And I
still remember them.
So I introduced to them the ability to scan the wings of the aircraft using a thermal camera while the passengers were getting on and off. The reason that's important is when a plane goes up to operating altitude, the wings are made up of a series of honeycomb compartments. And the moisture in there, when you go up into the atmosphere, the moisture in there freezes. And of course, when moisture freezes, it expands. And then, of course, when the plane comes down, it melts again. But this constant freezing and melting is a constant expansion and contraction, puts stress on the metal in the plane. And up until we introduced this system, the standard way of dealing with that was to have scheduled maintenance, preventative maintenance. So every so many hours of operation, the plane would come into the hangar and various bits and pieces would get pulled apart and either inspected and or repaired or replaced on a preventative basis. What I was able to do is bring in a thermal camera and scan the wings by walking underneath them while the plane's at the air bridge with the passengers getting on and off, which meant a lot of the ice was still in the wings. So it was very easy with thermal imaging to see where the stress points were. And so that would all be recorded. Here's another one for you on videotape, VHS videotape.
Good old VHS, yes.
And then we deliver that videotape to the maintenance engineers, and they could actually then, effectively in near real time, they could inspect the plane and they could know when it was going to need maintenance, which meant that maintenance became responsive rather than preventative, and they could time it better, which all adds up to fewer accidents and more cost-efficient maintenance. Only using parts when you need to use parts, but definitely using them when you do need, knowing that you need to use them. So things like that. So we did that. We also introduced with that same technology scanning the electrical switchboards in ships, and particularly in ocean-going oil tankers and container ships. So they have a great big electrical switchboard down in the bowels of the ship. Powered electricity is generated from running the diesel engines that turn generators that generate electricity. And every period, I forget the exact period, but every couple of years or something, the insurers require a complete inspection of the electrical system to make sure it's all going to keep working okay. To do that, you bring the ship alongside at a pier, and you go get a super long extension cable and plug the ship into the shore, because you have to turn the engines off because you need to be working on the electrical switchboards, which means they can't have electricity in them. So you need lights and air conditioning and all that sort of stuff. So basically you plug the ship into the shore and run the systems from electrical power on the shore. And then you bring a whole army, usually of apprentices with a few senior electricians, down into the bowels of the ship, and they all start opening all these cabinets and looking at everything and testing using torque wrenches to make sure the bolts holding the bus bars, which are the big copper bars that conduct the high energy electricity, making sure everything is right. Problem with that is they're a very complex environment, and you have to reach in with these tools to check things and measure things and tighten things. And the likelihood is you put on as many errors as you fix in getting into this environment. But you don't know anything that's wrong until you finally get everybody back, close everything up, turn the ship on again, and then find out what's working, what isn't working. What we did is we said, well, actually, when it's all operating, the electricity itself gives us the best indication, because if there's a loose connection or a bad connection, there'll be a hotspot. So we were able to come in while the ship was all running, while it's doing its ordinary thing, sitting alongside, loading, unloading, whatever, and we could scan with the thermal camera and then show the ship's engineers how it's all working and where the problems might be, which again meant that if they needed to fix something right away, they knew it, and if they didn't, they could schedule it, and if everything was working fine, they had evidence of that too. So the insurers liked it because it actually gave them better information. The engineers liked it because it was a lot simpler than bringing in an army of people and delaying. And of course, the ship operators loved it because it was much more cost effective.
But it would have been bringing in the whole a herd of people in to move bolts around and tighten things up. And yes, just these things are probably unbroken.
Reduce the amount of new errors.
And the other thing I did in that company, which I apologize for right now, is my partner got, in the very, very early days, the first introduction of speed cameras. or maybe even just red light cameras. I can't remember which one it was, but and my partner got photographed, and he went to get the photo to see what it was all about, and he came back, and the photo was of his car, but it was all pretty blurry. You couldn't really read the number plate. You couldn't really see it was him driving. So he gave it to me because I've been mucking around with some speech systems and image processing systems on computers. Now, again, on computers, you got to think back. This is PCAT, if that means anything to anyone. It's the second generation of personal computers.
Doesn't mean anything to me. No.
Right.
You
So
know.
it's a very long time ago. The 8086 chip, the original 8086 chip, and I was able to process it and clear it all up and make it all crystal clear so that you could see absolutely it was him driving and it was his number plate. And he took that back to the police and showed them what could be done. And he still had to pay his fine. But of course, after that, I had hoped that the police would contract with us to do that work, but it didn't quite work out that way. But I was instrumental in showing them what was possible. So sorry.
Sorry for everybody out there listening in.
So that was the beginning, I guess.
Yeah, it looks like you've been on the, like you said, cutting edge of tech and even just introducing it in smarter ways. That's how might we use technology, because that's ideating on what is there and what's available. And that's, I think you go to the point of a lot of, and you mentioned it earlier in the conversation, where a lot of tech companies are using the technology that exists and startups are using technology that exists and leveraging it. That's a similar thing to probably what you did back then, and looking at how you might iterate from it, evolve a process and create new value effectively.
And I'll tie that back to the startup thing. So that company was acquired by a well-established electrical contracting company here in Melbourne who needed an engineering capability, and they acquired it because of all this leading-edge technology work that I was doing. So basically, you know, if I quote the CEO of the acquirer, you know, we bought this company because of you. Now that was very nice, and that led to a lot of other interesting work. For instance, I installed the very first digital scoreboard at the MCG. And the reason I did that is because it was made by Mitsubishi, and it was run by a computer that was actually the same computer that was used on ships to run what they call the loading computer that managed how you loaded things into the ship. Because when you've got a big cargo ship, you know, if you don't load the cargo properly, balanced, then you'll break the ship. So there's actually a computer that helps decide, we'll load this much here and that much there and all that. So that was the same computer that Mitsubishi used. It was a Mitsubishi computer, and it was the same one they used for their scoreboards. So I got to install the very first digital scoreboard at the MCG, which was quite an interesting experience.
Hanging off the lights. That would have been nice and high.
Well, inside. We were inside
Yes.
that giant
Yes.
construction. I'm not even sure if it's still there, but yeah.
Yeah. It's probably evolved a few times over by now.
Oh,
but,
yeah.
Yeah. They've changed those stadiums and ripped them apart a couple of times in the past 20, 30 years.
It's an app in someone's pocket probably at the
Yeah,
moment.
well, I mean, back
Yes.
then it was a digital scoreboard, but the lights were still individual lamps. It wasn't a screen.
Okay, so yes, got it. Yeah, so the individual bulbs, so that would, yes.
Yeah, and they were
makes sense.
bulbs, not even LEDs.
Yeah.
They were
Yep.
high powered
Like a
tungsten
primitive
bulbs.
7-segment display.
Yes.
So that's sort of, and that evolved. And then that company got bought by a Dutch-based multinational. And once again, they were looking for an Australian company to buy to get them into the Australian, well, this is very topical, I guess, today, into the Australian submarine project. So that's how long ago it was, the last time we were thinking about building submarines. And they needed an Australian engineering company to give them access to bid for that project. So they bought us, and once again, I was told by the man doing the acquisition, and then later by the vice president and president of the company, that the decision to buy us versus others that they'd looked at was the engineering team that I ran, and the sort of work that we were doing. So I co-founded a company. I worked with Bleeding Edge Technology, and I went through, in that instance, 2 acquisitions. So that was sort of like
That's,
giving me a taste of all of
bit
this
of
sort of
background.
stuff.
Yeah, it would have been a good taste for you to go through that process. And was it always about acquisition or exiting, or was it just happened? Did it fall on that? You
Well,
sort of
no,
luck
in
at that
those
moment?
days, I wasn't thinking about, about exiting or selling the company. The Melbourne Electrical Contracting Company itself had in fact just been bought for the first time in 60 years, just before they bought us. And the CEO of that was a great mentor to me. He was a really nice guy, very fatherly, very smart businessman, had previously run Australia's largest engineering company, a company called ComEng. And so he really sort of shepherded me through that experience and taught me some of what was going on. I wasn't looking to be part of sell. No one in those days, no one I knew thought about ownership
Exiting
in
a
a company
business,
and selling
yeah.
companies and
Was it-
exits. It wasn't
They
that
should-
wasn't the nature of the world. I'm sure there were amongst the more mature people, like the CEO of this company. Sure, he was thinking about that sort of stuff, but it wasn't the way it is today. Certainly not around startups. You have to build a real business with very substantial revenues and profits and scalable markets and all the things you're supposed to have before anyone would even look at putting money into your company.
It wasn't common knowledge, really. Well, the
But if you
enticement
skip
wasn't there.
ahead to when I went to Silicon Valley in the 90s, I left in the early 90s, and there basically wasn't any venture capital in Australia, so I hadn't really heard about it. When I was in Silicon Valley, we were bootstrapped and profitable, one of San Jose Mercury News' 50 fastest growing companies. And we used to have these guys who'd like come and knock on the door and say, "Hi, I want to give you some money." We'd say, "Great, what do you want to buy?" Because we sell all these software products. We can sell the computers, but we don't really want to. We want you to buy them from our partners, but what do you want? "Oh, no, we just want to give you some money." "What are you talking about? We sell software." No, we just want to give you some money." "Go away, you're an idiot. Go away." Nobody...
Take some money.
It was that...
That's a bit different to Australia, isn't it?
Well, it was
Yes.
even a bit different there. We were a very international team. There was, and there was only, in the sort of the core original team, there was only one person from California who was actually born and bred in Silicon Valley, which is pretty unusual, really. But everyone else, there was one of the co-founders was from Oregon, and we had engineers from Scotland and England, and we had a guy from Canada, and so it was very sort of international team. And as a result, none of us had any experience, exposure, or even had heard the word venture capital previously. So in the early days, we didn't know who those guys were. We just thought they were crazy. And then a few years later, while we're doing quite well, and we got an unsolicited offer to invest in the company, or in fact, to buy the company. And like any unsolicited offer, it was a lowball offer. But it got us thinking. We knew the company was worth more than that. So it got us thinking, and we said, "Oh, well, let's have a look." Now, this is the 1990s. In the 1990s, the standard sort of exit was to do a listing. Probably on the NASDAQ, but maybe on the New York Stock Exchange, but to do a listing. So we started looking into that, and we discovered an interesting thing, that people don't really want to invest in your company or buy your company unless somebody has already invested in it. It's a fairly natural sort of thing to understand.
Money follows money, right?
Nobody wants to be the first one to take the risk, right?
Yeah.
So if someone else has taken the risk, that makes it seem like a better idea.
Uh-huh.
So we went back and decided we'd take some venture capital, and since we could choose, we pick and choose. We took venture capital from three investors. One was a small partnership that doesn't exist anymore, and the other two were iconic names. There was Arthur Rock and Bank Boston. And right around that time was actually when I came home, because I thought this is what Australia needs. Australia has really creative people who do wonderful things, very clever, a lot of initiative, do it all on the smell of an oily rag. They need people who can help guide them to success and can inject a bit of money as well. And that's what venture capital is most supposed to be. So I came home to get involved with venture capital in Australia. So when I came back late in the 90s, there was some what I call embryonic venture capital. Most of the people running the firms were the wrong people, but for the perfectly understandable reason. It happens in every single country, the first generation of VC is funded by institutions. People at the top of the institutions are, in our case, a superannuation fund manager. So when they're looking around, and they're experienced at putting money into private equity funds and things like that.
It's a completely different world that they're looking at, not startup ventures.
What they saw was venture capital fund manager. Oh, a person like me.
I'm a fund manager. Yes, correct.
But they look at consistent returns.
So they did it's natural. It's a perfectly human thing to do. They picked money managers. They picked people like them. And sadly, those are never, or almost never. I mean, it's not to say it's impossible to go from that background to being a good VC, not at all. But it's not the preferred background for being a good venture capitalist. The money is just the grease to the wheels. You're supposed to be doing a whole lot of other stuff. It's the intellectual capital contribution. So I came back and there's a whole bunch of stories, but I did end up co-founding a venture capital fund with the goal of showing that venture capital could be done faster and better than it was being done in Australia at the time, which we achieved. So we had a small privately backed venture capital fund. We ran it for 5 years. We sold the whole portfolio. We delivered an 8 times return to our investors. And of course, Australia being Australia.
You done very well. Not many VCs make money, so you don't realize that.
So that and some of the quirks of Australia, that very success made it hard for us to raise a second institutional fund. Not that we didn't try, but at the same time, I was looking for something else. How do you help the founders who have the vision and the passion and the dedication to give it their all? How do you help them and find a bit of money to help them progress without all the parasites in the middle of the system, all the investment banking activity, etc. And lo and behold, that's called angel investing. And although at that stage I'd already made more than a couple of angel investments, I hadn't really known that's what it was called. Like most of us, certainly late last century, it was just something that we did. It wasn't a label. So I decided to start the organized angel investor community in Australia. I found 4 other guys around the country who agreed. We set up a roof body, the Australian Association of Angel Investors, as a sort of a seminal influence. We all set up our own angel groups in different states and territories. And over the next 4 or 5 years, that community grew from the initial 4 angel groups to about 19 angel groups. Well, 17 angel groups. And understandably, not all of them survive for a variety of reasons. But that's how the angel group community got started in Australia. And so I spent a lot of time leading that and facilitating it, and lobbying government, and building international relationships, and running education programs. And the AAAI itself, again, one of the sad things about Australia is we tend to have a habit of fragmenting our ecosystems. And that started to happen, and it was no longer possible for me to keep the AAAI going in a practical sense. But then again, it had served its purpose, and not everything has to last forever. So
not everything does it?
No. So I shut it down after giving it a good solid run, and focused back on Melbourne Angels, which has been one of the longest running and most active groups in the country. And then, because I always wanted it to be a thing of its own, not just about me, I started a few years ago implementing a succession model, a succession plan. So as of nearly 2 years ago now, I stopped being the president of Melbourne Angels. I'm still called the president emeritus, but Paul Barron took over as president, but on a different model. So it wasn't about trying to find someone who's going to spend the next 20 years, giving it their all.
Doing it.
It's about building a more sustainable model. And so that's where we're at. So now I'm a sort of an active member of the group, but I'm not formally part of the leadership team. The one thing I basically still do is I still do the training, because that's programs that I've developed and delivered to angel groups all over Australia and New Zealand and Asia.
And if anyone is fortunate enough to go out and see Jordan. Definitely worth it. I was at a investment thesis sort of talk that you did, and yeah, it's quite fascinating the way you think and structure it, and just your depth and breadth of knowledge is quite a lot compared to many other people that I see that are trying to jump into the space. So it's definitely a good resource if you want to hear from Jordan and the Melbourne Angels group.
Well, thank you for that. And yes, all of the training courses are open to everybody. We believe that if everybody gets to learn together, then you get rid of the misinformation and you get rid of the friction, and everybody will end up spending more time on building businesses and less time on doing silly things around transactions, because startups and startup investing are not investment banking. They are not transaction focused. So if everything you do is about what's happening in the transaction, you're probably going to fail as an investor.
Yes, so generally at an angel level, it's that early that their businesses are free revenue. They may just have a MVP, if that. So it's more from the taking.
You're investing in the team.
You're investing the team, the idea, the concept, as well as more the upside of it, right? So, but I think that bears back into some of the lessons I learned in the investment thesis, and it's about the person. Who are you investing in, and what's important to you as an investor? So, it depends which hat you're wearing. In the world of startups, it's probably a very difficult question, but what's your investment thesis? What's important to you in that space? That might be a better way to frame the question I was going to come up with. What's important to you as to who you're investing into? And I think cutting edge technology may have something to do with it, but what's those key things that are important to you when you look at a startup that you're considering investing into?
So, I mean, there's always a mix of things, and each case brings its own blend. But to me, certainly the people are always important. I have to have a good feeling about the people. I have to trust them. Now, I've got all these stories about these really good little startups where during the course of due diligence, the founders lied to me, and I'm not a huge egregious lie. I mean, a good example was halfway through due diligence, the two founders changed their story about the terms that they wanted. So I said, well, okay, we can talk about that, but where are you getting this advice? Oh, no, we're not getting any advice. We just came up with this ourselves. And that didn't make sense. I mean, they'd never mentioned any of it before. They hadn't demonstrated any understanding or awareness of that particular issue before. I didn't think it was a big issue for their company, so I hadn't bothered raising it. And now all of a sudden they're putting it front and center. And it was all about control.
Okay.
And that usually means there's somebody giving them advice. And I just wanted them to tell me who, so I knew who I'm dealing with. Or my dad's giving us advice, or we met this lawyer, or we've got this accountant, or whatever it might be. And I can understand, I can have an intellectual appreciation that the first time I asked, they didn't feel comfortable saying, I don't really understand. I don't understand the need to lie. I mean, the truth doesn't really
not a major
hurt you.
thing to share that. Yeah, it's not.
But I
Yes.
can understand confusion and apprehension. So I sort of let it slide, and we went a bit further. But in the course of the next week or so of completing due diligence, I asked them 3 times the same question. Each time they came up with this new piece of input that they'd never had before, and each time they said, "Oh no one." And so I said, "All right, well, I'm not going to invest because I believe I will just lose money with people who lie to me." Now, I didn't. No, I really like.
Is that a past experience, Jordan?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, to be fair, I really liked and still quite like those guys and their business, and it was very close to my heart. It was an electronics engineering and hardware business, so a lot of things, servicing the heavy engineering and mining sector. So a lot of things I knew about, I understood. I thought they had a great chance to be successful. At the moment, they are being successful. But I decided to follow the rules I had learned by experience.
Yes.
And step away. On the other hand, there have been times when I've just really felt that this was a good person that I really wanted to support, and that I thought they had a good chance of doing good things, and have let that sway me. None of these things should be on their own. So yeah, the other thing, to answer your earlier question, the other things I look for is I much prefer some real technology, something that is creating new value and a barrier to competition. In one sense, I'm less concerned about whether it's patentable. Intellectual property protection
does it really matter anymore? What's your thoughts on that?
So patents are really valuable when you get started because they give you a way to get into the market that's differentiated and protected. And they're really valuable at exit time because big acquirers like patent structures, particularly if they're listed companies, because it gives them something that the whole system understands. Okay?
Okay. Yep.
In between the two, protection. It's of modest value to have a large patent portfolio. But not everything is patentable. A lot of software isn't really patentable and arguably shouldn't be. Remember, a patent is about telling the world exactly how you do what you do. So if you write something...
It's sharing all your trade secrets, isn't it? Yes.
Well, it's certainly sharing all your intellectual property secrets. Trade secrets are something a little bit different, but...
Yes, intellectual property secrets.
So,
yes, good correction.
And of course, if your innovation is all in your business model, then there's probably nothing patentable. But that said, famously Amazon got a patent on the one click for making a purchase, which wasn't even a one click. And that held up for a little while. So, look, patents are a strategy that can be employed in the right circumstances and should be employed in the right circumstances. But your best defense in startup world is speed. Yep. Whatever you're doing, just do it really well and grow really fast. And if you can't do that, then you have a very different set of challenges. So if you look at anything in a regulated environment, so pharmaceuticals and medical stuff, it's very hard for them to move quickly and grow fast because they have to go through all the measured, slow stage gates of a regulated environment.
It can take 5-7 years. Yeah, it can be a long, long time for some specific, especially in surgery.
Because it's a well-regulated environment, everybody recognizes the value inflection you get as you pass through each regulatory stage gate. So you can be a pharmaceutical company and you finish your phase 1 clinical trials, and everybody knows that that's a big step in value, 3 or 4 times improvement in value because you've achieved that. And there'll be somebody willing to buy that company at that stage. So, and if not, you go on and you do your phase 2 and you succeed there and you get another big step function in value, great increase. And again, there'll be somebody ready to buy you at that stage because it's a very regulated environment.
It's being validated by the industry.
So there are pros and cons to all these things. But I look at the people, I look at the technology for strength and differentiation and sustainability. So what I call the sustainable, unfair competitive advantage. All right. How are you going to be really, really out there in front of the market? And then, of course, you have to look at the market. I'm not big on consumer plays. Most consumer stuff is about brand building, and that needs tens or hundreds of millions of dollars of...
It's a lot of marketing dollars, isn't it? Yeah, it's a very different thing than, B2B is much...
Yeah, so
it can be a slower grind though, in terms of especially getting traction and startup. But once you get some traction,
yes and no. In fact, consumer plays are probably the ones where you don't have a lot of time. Right?
Yeah, you need to be fast, right? Because there's so many other people out there doing a similar thing.
I mean, for many consumer plays, there is nothing terribly different about what you're doing that can't be copied or isn't already in the market. I mean, it depends, but and you don't always have to be first. So famously, Apple is very successful as a slow follower. Right? The one thing Apple was first to market with was a thing called the Apple Newton. It was the very first, what in those days was called personal digital assistant, which is basically what today we'd call a smartphone without phone functionality. And it wasn't anywhere near as smart, but it was a very clever device. Completely failed. The Apple Newton completely failed. But every piece of core technology, the touchscreen writing technology, the voice technology, the portable or mobile operating system technology, every key piece of that technology found itself a home in other personal digital assistants that were very successful in the following years. For everything else, Apple has been a very slow follower. You know, the iPod that helped turn the company around. There were 273 other MP3 player products in the market before the iPod came to market.
They were never the first, were they? Not in any of those.
So
I think,
but they
their
have done a
biggest-
great job of building a consumer franchise,
they have, yeah.
It's the
consumer
brand.
brand that people love and empathize with, and as a result, pay a premium for and are happy to be trapped into their proprietary ecosystem.
Trapped. I like how you said that. So you're not an Apple user. I said that.
Oh, well, my very first computer when I was a kid was the very first Apple PC, what was called the Apple II Euro Plus. Euro Plus meaning it was the Apple II outside the United States. So, you know, I was a very early Apple user and quite a fan of how Apple got started and everything. And I really admire that Apple has achieved a number of key things. So Apple is a computer company who have changed their core chip 3 times, and they're still successful. No other computer company in history has changed it once and succeeded. Everybody who, you know, if anyone else had said, "Oh, I'm going to throw out the Pentium chip and take on the AMD chip," they all failed. It killed their businesses, and that's a long time ago. But they did that, and they were also Apple started at a time when all technology was proprietary. All hardware and software was proprietary to the company that built it. And one by one, all of the companies that stayed proprietary died off. Huge names that were icons that these days most people have never heard of, like Digital Equipment Corporation, just died off. Apple stayed a walled garden, stayed a proprietary technology business and survived. It's the sort of last surviving of its kind. And because it was the last, it was able to turn it into a virtue. And now, to this day, we all know that Apple products always start off embedded in the Apple ecosystem with proprietary interfaces and proprietary software. Over time, of course, they open up and they interoperate because you have to. But it was really Microsoft and Intel, what's called the Wintel partnership, Windows and Intel, who moved into the open systems, not open source, but open systems environment, where everything is available for everybody to interact with and to work on. That's what actually gave the world the whole sort of commercial consumer computer age. Because now you had a platform that everybody could play with. People could build, you know, accessory cards for the IBM PC, which, you know, you can drop the IBM now, it's just the PC, as opposed to the Mac.
And that changed and that got us to sort of scale, right? So, yeah, you had a lot more innovation happening around the whole ecosystem rather than a Mac, which is, locked down. But they've done very well.
But yeah, they don't sell specs though, like the other computer companies used to.
No,
everything how much RAM and how fast is the CPU was the selling point. But Mac has never been focused on that. Or they might have been back in the day.
It was who really understands that. I think that's the thing that Apple saw, that the end consumer, the non-technical, didn't really understand that anyway. And they didn't sell a product on that.
Apple's the company that introduced the word evangelist for their sales and marketing people, right? And I think that's very telling. Go out there and evangelize. It's not about, you know, as you say, Anthony, it's not about the specs. I mean, they always talked about the specs, but they were telling you how, but this is the best experience and it's the sexiest looking thing, and it's just right for the people doing industrial and graphics design, or it's just right for the people doing movies, or, you know, they marketed it as a consumer brand and a niche brand product and became the biggest company in the world. So, you know, so it's not that I don't like Apple or have anything against Apple at all. Without Apple as the counterpoint to the broader ecosystem, neither would exist, right? You have to have this competition and this tension because it keeps everybody moving forward.
Keeps everyone innovating, right? Makes sense. What keeps you going, Jordan? Obviously, you've done quite well in your career, and you've had probably quite an interesting journey. What keeps you going every day?
Well, it may have already become obvious in the last little while that I get quite passionate about the things that I do. And that passion is around what I said at the beginning about change for a better world. So in your question, what am I looking for in a company that I want to invest in? I'm looking for a company where the founder and the founding team and the business is about a vision and a passion to change the world for the better, even if it's in just a little way. I'm not excited about a better way of ordering coffee.
I enjoy coffee, so I'm okay with that.
Yeah, well, I don't drink coffee, but that's not why I'm not interested in it. I'm not interested in a better way of ordering pizza, although that's it. One of our portfolio companies that's doing quite well is delivering pizza with drones. So it has a big contract with Domino's now to deliver pizza with drones, which is quite exciting.
And that's the cutting edge technology there, the drone.
Yes and no. So as an example, when that company came to us quite some years ago, the founder came to us and said, drone hardware, commoditized. Drone software, commoditized. But everybody's talking about how there's going to be drone delivery, and no one knows how to make that business work. So his proposition was figure out how to run the operating end of drone delivery and be ready with that as a service or a product when the world finally says, yes, let's start delivering with drones.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
On that journey, he, of course, we all discovered, that the commoditized drone technology was true, but it wasn't suitable for delivery. So they had to develop their own drone that was suited to the use case. And similarly, yes, there was software for flying a drone, but drone delivery is like running an airline, right? You've got to have air traffic control. You've got to know about your assets and where they are and what's going on and track everything in real time. And so there's actually a whole lot of new software and hardware that had to be developed and evolved and adapted from other sectors like the aerospace industry. So there's quite a lot of new stuff that had to be done there. So yes, now it is cutting edge technology. Still to get to the same end point, which is be able to show people there is a business that works for drone delivery. Because, of course, Domino's don't really care about the drones. They care about making pizzas and getting them in the hands of their customers.
Yeah, correct.
And at a price point that keeps them all viable.
Yep.
Yeah, I can see your passion as you talk about just the businesses that you invested in. If you were to just that first-time founder, that maybe the main expert that's looking to come out into industry, make a difference, add some value, make a change in the industry, what advice would you give them? What advice would you give them if they're looking for funding or if they're looking from a starting point? What's some of the key things you've seen that really sets people up for success? Is probably a good way to ask that question.
Well, first of all, only do something if you're really passionate about it, because it's a hard journey. And you're going to have something to sustain you through the challenges and the hard times. And that's got to come from inside. You also want good support. So make sure that if you already have a partner, make sure that they want to come on this journey too. Because in my experience, when one partner decides they're going to become a startup founder and that's not what the relationship contemplated, then that relationship usually breaks down. And that's sad, but perhaps appropriate. The good news today, as opposed to say 20 years ago, is that today there is such a massive startup ecosystem that you'll probably find a new partner in that ecosystem who's more aligned with what you're trying to do. And here I'm talking about life partner, not business partner, although they could, of course, both be the same thing. So be aware of the personal social cost. Don't assume that the first thing you have to do is raise money. That's probably one of the biggest lies that's out there at the moment. We've got all the government agencies and everybody, they all think and talk, because none of them have really been at the coalface, that it's all about finding money and making it available to all the startups who want to get going. One of the issues with that is there's not a lot of respect for the money in that model. But the other thing is there's no reason for that to be the case. The world is a different world. So when I started doing startups, nobody got paid till the company made enough money. Today, most people won't start working for a startup unless they're getting paid a market rate salary. Maybe not top of market, but they want to get paid a functional salary and not take any real risk on that score. And that makes startups very expensive. So
and it puts all the risk on the capital, the VC, right?
Well, it shifts the nature, the dynamics of how you share the risk. So think about what you're going to do. Think about why it's going to succeed. What is going to be the core trick that makes it succeed? The secret sauce, the speciality, whatever it might be. So just one sort of stat that's relevant here. The research that's being done says that the number one reason that startups fail at a 42% significance level, so that's the highest significance level, is market timing, meeting the market. Similarly, the research that says what is the number one reason that startups succeed, as it turns out, also at 42% significance level, is market timing. So basically, and by the way, as far as failure goes, getting investment funding is the 16th most significant reason. So it's way down there at about 7 or 8% significance level. So it's not a significant reason for failure, not getting funding. It is a higher contributor to success. So there is that imbalance. It's about the fifth reason, I think, for success. But the real issue here is market timing. So when people are thinking about stepping out to start something, think about who you're trying to serve. Who is your customer? And in today's world, often you've got two things. You've got a customer and a user. Customer is the one who actually pays you. It may, in fact, particularly if you're going to do something consumer related, you may, in fact, be focusing on your customer's customer as your user. So you need to understand the market structure, the market dynamics, and you need to understand what is going to motivate people. And one of the biggest mistakes I see is people who start out entirely based on a market analysis of one. That is, I've got this problem, I like this solution, therefore it'll work for everybody.
We've only seen that a couple of times, Anthony, haven't we?
No, yes. I did that myself with all my ideas.
Look, it's perfectly human. I understand it. But none of us is perfectly matched to a market. And we need to be aware of that. Now, some of us will be much closer to the market. I am very atypical. I'm contrarian in so many ways. It's very unlikely I'm ever going to be typical of a market, a consumer market or a business market. And I know that, so I don't judge any of it by my response. But as a founder, you have to be able to step outside yourself and see why what you want to offer is going to be valuable to people. And will it be valuable at the level you need? Will they pay enough for what you want to offer them to make this a viable business? And then the last thing I'll comment on is be aware that there's always competition. I wish I had just $1 for every time I've heard a founder say, oh, there are no competitors, because there's a good chance that would be my biggest single return. I'm pretty sure I'd have at least $1 million for that. Because
Brilliant.
I think we would too.
Always competition, right? And so the way I describe it is there's competition for share of wallet. In other words, there is nobody standing out there with I'll open up my wallet and here I've got a $50 note and it's got Andrew's name on it. And I'm just waiting for Andrew to come along to sell me whatever he's going to sell me, and here's the $50 I'm going to spend with Andrew. That's not the way the world works. Every dollar in the wallet is being spent on something now. And if you want your share of that wallet, you have to get something else out. You have to compete for your share of that wallet.
So everyone has a pie to work with, as you would say, right?
Right.
So there's an allocation, and then that allocation is going here, 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 or here. And competition, like you said, can be completely different category, completely different something else, and then I have no money left to pay for your product. So yeah, there's a fair point.
And that comes down to your customer's value system, right? Not what you think is valuable, what your customer thinks about it. Customers buy benefits to them, not features of your product, but the benefits that they enjoy by using your product or service. And that's an old saw. That's the way business has been taught for over 100 years. But it's amazing how hard it is for most new founders to really understand and relate to that as their core strategy.
Jordan, great summary there. It's been a pleasure having you on the DevReady podcast, and I think we could go for hours just picking your brain because there's plenty of knowledge and depth and breadth of information there. So really thank you for coming on. We're probably at the top of the hour. So Jordan Green from Melbourne Angels, effectively. Do you also do any consulting or anything to support people in business or anything in that world?
Well, yes and no. I'm always open to getting paid for my advice, but I'm not cheap.
Fair point. Well, if anyone wants to find out more about Jordan, jump on Melbourne Angels, their website, or Jordan Green on LinkedIn, just to learn a little bit more about him. But like I said, they run events every quarter at Melbourne Angels, and
every month. We have a networking lunch open to the whole community on the last Friday of every month except December. And we have our training courses 5 or 6 times a year, which if you get on the mailing list from the website, you won't be inundated. You'll just get emails about the lunches and emails about the training courses. And then we get involved in other things along the way as well. We do a lot of support for the ecosystem. You'll see our members turning up as speakers and judges and mentors and accelerators and all that sort of stuff.
Brilliant, Jordan. I really appreciate you coming on the DevReady podcast. And thanks for sharing a bit more about you and your story and your background. It's always good to share where you've come from and what you're up to today. So thank you again for your time.
Well, thank you, Andrew and Anthony. I really appreciate it, and keep up what you're doing. It's really important.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks.